Throughout history and in virtually all cultures, there have been people who have had a mystical experience. Christian cultures call it an epiphany. The Japanese regard it as satori. But what really is a mystical experience? Today we've invited 3 guests from different faiths who have spent their lives trying to discover a way to describe the indescribable. Maata Lynn Barron has been initiated as a Naqshbandi Sufi. Lynn is a practicing mystic who teaches widely and leads a Sufi community in Southern California. Jonathan Omer-Man is a Jewish rabbi, teacher, and writer who helped create the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. Brother David Steindl-Rast has been a Benedictine monk for over 50 years, living for extended periods of time in total silence and contemplation. Welcome to a truly unique conversation, the mystical experience. Welcome all of you to Global Spirit. First, I want to express my deep gratitude for all of you agreeing to gather with us to explore this timeless phenomena of what's been called mystical experience. Brother David, I'd like to begin with you. I know you've spent your life in solitude and prayer on this spiritual path. Can you describe what that life has been like, and also the influence that studying other religions has had on your own faith?
Well, I've been a Benedictine monk now for 56 years, and in that time I have had many different experiences also of other religions. Originally, I was perfectly happy in my own monastery and my own tradition, and I still am. But after being in the monastery for about 12 years, I was sent out to have dialogue with Buddhist, Zen Buddhist monks who had come to the States at that time. And then I spent several years, actually, as it turned out, in training with Buddhist monks. And so that has influenced my spiritual life very much. But I came to discover that what's in the center of the Zen tradition, which is silence, really, wordless silence and presence in the now, is also at the center of our own Benedictine tradition. So it wasn't something new, it's just the emphasis is different. In our tradition, there's more emphasis on the word, and there's more emphasis on the silence.
Thank you. Maata Lynn, you've been described as an unlikely candidate for mystical experience. Can you tell us why you are unlikely and what your background was that brought you to this threshold?
Well, I was actually, I didn't have what you would call formal training. I had an interest in the truth, and I studied metaphysics for many years, and didn't really know anything about the idea of the mystical dimension of any tradition whatsoever. But in metaphysics, because you're looking for the truth that is behind everything, and because you're allowed to use all scriptures, holy books, you're kind of dipping into what I call this stream of consciousness that has been going on since the beginning. And so it was quite easy for me to see the truth in a way that wasn't just within one religion. But I had a life like everyone else. I worked, went to school, did different, so I didn't even know that what happened to me was even a possibility. So it was a surprise, to say the least.
Jonathan, as a Jewish rabbi, you come from a vast and profoundly deep history of mysticism in the Judaic tradition. And yet, you've also struck out on a unique path because you've been studying Sufism. Can you describe your relationship to mysticism?
Well, the Jewish tradition is, even in mystics, is of householders. And that is, we maintain interest in in large ranges of interest, including earning a living while we're on our path. Mysticism in the Jewish tradition is regarded, as opposed to Kabbalah, the kind of exoteric studies, is regarded as rather private. And there's a great deal of reticence about what you call the mystical experience. It's acknowledged, but the confessional discussion of it never is. I know in my classes I've always discouraged people from talking about their experiences because sometimes it becomes competitive or show off. And so for myself, I know what it's about and I can describe it obliquely, but not explicitly.
Okay. Thank you. Brother David, can you give us some of the background in the Christian tradition of mysticism?
I think if we want to speak about the mystic experience, we should first say just exactly what we mean by it. And I think one could say it's an experience, first of all. That's important, that you are not just thinking about it or reading about it, but that it's something that you personally experience. And it is an experience of oneness, basically, of being in the present and being truly yourself and being one with all, limitless oneness, limitless belonging. That is what I mean when I speak about the mystic experience. And in the Christian tradition, that is triggered by, if I speak now the language of the tradition, by God speaking to you. God speaks. That is one of the central insights of the whole Bible. God speaks. So this is the deep insight. But God doesn't speak as a whisper in our ears or something like that. But the idea is that everything, every person, every situation is a word of God that is addressed to you. And that would be sort of the core of Christian experience, that God speaks to you through someone, something, or in some particular situation. To me, through music, through nature, sometimes through people, less so.
Yes. Jonathan, I see you nodding vigorously as Brother David is speaking. So does this make sense to you?
Oh, absolutely. The idea of God speaking, I describe it in a slightly different way, that I can look at my path as beckoning. More than a quest from within, it's a beckoning towards, and inviting, and much of the work is a work of discrimination. When the beckoning isn't really the divine beckoning, but my projection onto other objects, other idolatries, seductions, and so it's very important for me to be discriminating in listening to the beckoning, and to be cautious about the experiences. Experiences, from my understanding, are not in themselves truth. They're signs. They're pointers. And nothing to hold on to, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Lynn, does it feel like a summons, a beckoning to you from your experience?
There's a practice that I do with my students. It's a prayer. It's a series of prayers, actually. And the first one is, Yahadi, open our hearts that we may hear thy voice that constantly cometh from within. And so they actually sit in meditation with this, and we all drop together into the heart. And this meditation that I do with people, it's called Muraqabah, and it's a watchful waiting state. Because it isn't, like you said, someone isn't whispering in your ear, but somewhere something is being revealed to you, and you know it in your heart. It's a different way of knowing than you have in your mind. And it's such a direct communication, and it's transforming.
Would you say it is simply the experience of a presence that you meet?
Yes, yes.
And you meet the presence mediated through something or someone or some situation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like I said, with my students, we actually do a practice to start this process. And then, there's 3 other steps to it. But the first one is you have to have the awareness that this is a potential or a possibility for you. Because a lot of people don't think that it is.
Jonathan, is this word presence important to you?
Oh, absolutely. The presence is often veiled, and much of our work is in the attempt to turn the veils that conceal into veils that reveal. The divine is in every piece of bread, but beyond our possible comprehension. So it is a veil, and we can see the divine shimmering within it, with the contemplation on doing the blessing.
Beautiful.
I like your emphasis on blessing. Blessing is such an important word for me too. The blessing comes alive. Everything is blessing. Everything is blessing. St. Augustine says everything is grace. That means everything is blessing. So at every moment we receive blessing, but we have to pass it on so that it comes really alive.
Yes.
The religion historian Houston Smith has written, as other scholars have, that our major religions have actually been founded on mystical experience. If you look at the lives of Moses, Mohammed, and Jesus, with their revelations, their epiphanies, how does that happen? Jonathan?
Yes, if you look at Moses, he had the experience of the ineffable, with the burning bush almost wordless. And then he was told, go out into the world, liberate your people. And by the way, his response was, who, me? And God said, yes, you. So it is the experience immediately translated into action, sometimes even to political action. The Prophet Mohammed had to go to Mecca and to start organizing the tribes and placating and removing the idols. So it is both mystical but immediately translated, unless it remains a private experience. It is translated into a social, sometimes political reality.
That's wonderful. Brother David, can you speak to the active aspect of mysticism?
Yes, I think that is the main difference between the run-of-the-mill of us and the great mystics whom we so admire. We shouldn't put them up on a pedestal as if they were a different kind of people. The mystic is not a different kind of human being, but every human being is a different kind of mystic, and we ought to become the kind of mystic who we are. But Abraham Maslow already explored what makes human beings particularly creative, particularly resilient, what makes great people, and came to the conclusion, to his own greatest surprise, that it was mystic experience. And he also actually wrote about it, and in psychological literature it didn't sit so well, so he changed the term from mystic experience to peak experience, because it's a peak of consciousness. But to the end of his life he insisted that what he called peak experience was indistinguishable from what the great mystics called mystic experience, or what we call mystic experience in the religious context. Mm-hmm. And the difference is that the great mystics allow this experience to flow into their lives, to inform their lives, to live accordingly. And many of us suppress it or forget it or don't take it seriously or whatever we do with it, because we feel that we need to keep everything under control. And the mystic experience, if it is anything, is a moment in which nothing is under control. St. Bernard of Clairvaux says, what we can grasp and control in that sense gives us knowledge, but what grabs us gives us wisdom. And the mystic experience is something that grabs us, takes hold of us, in contrast.
In the autobiographies of the great mystics, Don't they often describe this experience as quite rare in their lifetimes?
One should say that once would be enough for a lifetime.
So it isn't a matter of every day, but it's something that remains within one.
Yes.
It's very much
However, one can also reach a certain plateau, and then the peaks are not so high anymore, they are not so noticeable anymore, and everything can become occasion for experience the presence and experience the wonders. As you said, through the blessings of everything every day should really be a little mystic experience.
Yes,
and
exactly.
I think you will agree to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what is it that we are longing for? Is it a taste of the timeless? Is it an encounter with the divine?
Mine
What are we
was
longing for?
Home. Home.
Home.
I knew I was going home, and I didn't care what I had to do. I had to get home. And I used absolutely everything in my everyday life to get me home.
That's beautifully
Movies,
expressed.
Exactly.
Music,
My answer is
conversations with people. Absolutely everything was a teacher for me. But it had a direction. I had a destination, and I wanted it to be a straight path. I was not interested in a distraction. So I sat places for really a long time until I was told, you need to move. And there's someone over here that can offer you a little bit more for where you are now in your unfoldment. And I was usually released from this in order to move over there. But it was all about getting home.
Does the word home speak to you, Jonathan?
Oh, very much. The beckoning is home. But home has many, many levels. There is home of the moment, there is home in wholeness, the wholeness of completion, the home that you have to finish all your business. You know, God said to Abram, leave your home, lowercase, to a place that I shall show you. Leave all your family connections, leave all your expertise, leave everything behind. Go to a place of the unknown, which is the true home.
Yes, belonging is also one of the words. Longing to belong. Home is where we belong, you see. T.S. Eliot says in the Four Quartets, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started from and know the place for the first time. And that is home. And St. Augustine says, restless is our heart until it rests in you, O God. But we should not mistake that as if we knew already who God is, and so we know we are restless until we... No, all we know from experience is our restlessness, and it points in a direction. And it is as if St. Augustine were telling us what he means when he uses the word God. It's that towards which all our longing points. It's a direction rather than something or somebody. And then we discover that we can have a relationship to that towards which we are going.
In the Talmud, there's that magnificent line, God wants the heart. So if we're feeling this longing, is it possible that we are feeling God's longing for us to come home?
Yes. I kept having this sense of someone, come to me, come to me, come to me, come to me. And it was stay in the light, it's the way, stay in. And so wherever that light was, and so there was this, and then at some point of arrival, it was like, almost like a little giggle or something. Oh, we finally made it. It's been a long journey.
Does everybody have this urge at one time or another in their life, or do certain people feel it just much more strongly than others?
I always had it, ever since I can remember. So I don't know about other people, though.
Ditto. I don't know about other people. I've always had it.
Maslow says every human being has these peak experiences. Somewhere, sometime or other. So that would point in the direction that everybody has this longing to belong. But how it expresses itself will be very different from person to person.
Something that we've tried to encourage and emphasize on our show, Global Spirit, has been people describing their own personal experience. A moment of transcendence, a peak experience, an epiphany. Brother David?
Well, as an example, I would say, but you can only describe the outside. When I was a student, one morning I was eating breakfast, and the radio was playing and played Gluck's Dance of the Blessed Spirits. And I was just gone. I think I had the piece of bread sort of halfway to my mouth, and there it stayed. I don't know for how long. Maybe it was just a few seconds, but it seemed like ages. And that piece just sent me. You see, I listened to it so deeply that it took me into that silence out of which it comes. That's all I can say. It was an experience of total bliss.
Wonderful. Lynn, how about yourself? Do you have a moment to share with us?
I could actually say that this is a good description. I mean, I may not have toast here, but it is sort of the idea that all of a sudden you're present somewhere else. Dimensionally, you're not in time, not in space. You have no awareness how long you've been gone. And I have many, many triggers for this. I spent a number of years in these states, and that's what my teacher helped with. And I'll give one story on how he trained me to be able to take me out of these states pretty quickly. I was in India, and there was a woman with us, and she had become ill. And so my teacher was kind of insisting that I take care of her. And I really didn't want to. I was very kind of gone, and I was like, oh, I need someone to take care of me. How can I be taking care of someone else? And so he sent me into the village to get some medicine for her. And when I arrived in the village, it was the village that I knew. I was on my way to the pharmacy. I saw the sign, there were these red crosses, and then all of a sudden the village changed. And I wasn't in the village that I knew any longer. And so this quality of fear, but it's the awe of God kind of fear for me. I was just like, oh, no, where am I? I have no idea. I just had the money for the medicine, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, so this is where I'm just going to stand here until this shifts, because I had had enough experience that I knew that eventually this would pass and I would be right back where I was when you were still back, your toast in your hand. And so this is the way it was for me, moving me in ways that you can live in these shifting states of consciousness with an ease.
Jonathan, do you warm to this notion of transport?
Oh, very much so. A couple of months ago, I went with my brother and sister-in-law, and my wife and I, to Yosemite, and something happened there that I felt facing those eternal rocks, those redwoods, the waterfalls, such a beckoning to eternity that it was. I didn't know how to come back. I was reluctant to come back. And I was aware, I don't know if we'll ever discuss this here, because it's a part of the mystical understanding, is the nature of beckoning to beyond death. that there was a way in which life and death were one. One of the wonderful things about being in the redwoods, there are vertical trees and horizontal trees, and they live together so easily. The vertical trees aren't afraid of touching the horizontal trees that fell down earlier. But I mean, apart from that, I felt in this place of eternity, and it's still very much with me. Both the image, which is fading, because all images fade, but the experience of hearing that beckoning from the voice, the whispering of God from the rocks, from the waterfall, from the trees. Come, come, forget everything. Be, to quote our friend Ram Dass, be here now. But be here, yes.
These experiences are usually called ineffable. So William James described them as that. And yet the three of you have just gifted us with your anecdotes, and it seems you each felt something about what each other experienced.
Because we've experienced it.
It was
And so once you have this experience, anyone can tell, and you know exactly what they're speaking about, because you've had the experience as well.
But I would stress again that everybody has these experiences.
I agree with
Everybody
you.
has
Without
them.
enough awareness,
We
though.
have just to pay attention to them.
More.
They don't have to be Yosemite or some big wonderful music. I remember once being totally blown away by having when the water in the bathtub was too hot, and I added cold water, and it made a pattern in the bathtub, and that was more than a lifetime of experience. It was just, as you say, life and death and joy and pain, and it brought tears to my eyes. Nothing but mixing cold and hot water in a bathtub and seeing what it does. That can be enough.
I often ask students if they remember ever sitting at a bus stop and you miss your bus because it passes you by because you're somewhere else. So there's certain kind of ways that you can sit that kind of help this to happen, I guess. And a lot of people, oh yeah, I have been at the bus stop and I was off somewhere else and the bus kept going and I missed it.
And children often have these experiences, and we say to them, don't just sit there and stare into the air, just do something. On the contrary, we should say to them, don't just do something, sit there. The Native Americans have this saying, a well-educated child should be able to sit and look when there's nothing to be seen, should be able to sit and listen when there's nothing to be heard. If we allowed our children to do that, we would have a very different kind of society.
What is the general population afraid of when they hear or they witness an experience? Can fear hold us back?
Of course, that is the great enemy, wouldn't you say so?
Oh,
you doubt.
Yeah, the reason why this fearfulness is so dangerous is that it leads to aggression, to violence. Behind every war is fear. Behind every act of violence is fear. Between even our economic crisis is fear, because fear is the opposite of trust. And so betrayed trust leads to fear. That fear is what both the Hebrew and the Greek Bible have in mind when they repeat over and over, fear not, fear not. It's the one commandment in the Bible that's repeated more often than any other.
which means that people do it, because you don't forget things that people don't do.
What about the fear of fundamentalists of the mystical experience?
I'm not hesitant to speak about fundamentalism from the inside, because I think that all of us go through a fundamentalist phase in our religious development. Only if you're lucky, you pass through it. If you get some help, you pass through it. And then sooner or later, you learn that there is more to it. But you are always afraid to let go of what you already know, and before you let go of what you know, you cannot know more. So exposure is a great help.
I was, by one of my teachers, told, Jonathan, don't forget that you're always 20% fanatic, fundamentalist, and 80% nice guy, open, spiritual seeker. And to maintain that balance within me, it keeps me in my practice. That, you know, there is that 20% of me that is demanding of precision, of fidelity, and so I do possess the fundamentalist within me, spiritually, but not sociologically.
We live in a very frightening period of history, don't we? And so we want to have something firm to hold on to. And the Bible would be, if it is misunderstood, to be something to hold on to. I believe that, as it has been said so wisely, you can either take the Bible literally or seriously. And I would like to take it seriously.
No, I don't resonate with the idea of I've ever been a fundamentalist. And it might be because of my training and because I was seeking the truth and I didn't have to seek it inside of a certain container. Then I was able to dip into the truth of your tradition.
Lynn, how do you respond to the attacks on the Sufi shrines in Afghanistan and Pakistan?
I don't understand
is
it at all.
there something threatening about the shrines?
Yeah. But even with all of the Buddhist statues in Afghan, all of these things, it doesn't matter, you know, if they're Sufi shrines or there's a special quality of baraka at these places, a special transmission of divine energy, and to destroy that just doesn't make sense to me.
Brother David, I know you've worked with Fritjof Capra and David Bohm and so on. Do you see a parallel between the mystic's search for unitive experience, you and the other are one, and what some scientists, the great physicists, also are searching for, I think, with a deep passion?
Oh yeah, I think for us today to avail ourselves of the insights of science is a great gift. Only if we take science to explain anything, science is not set up to explain anything. Science is to explore the facts, and if we take these facts and see them in a wider context, which science itself is not able to give us, they can be awe-inspiring. Just to think that we live in a universe with so many Milky Ways and so many galaxies all over. It's just, and so many billions of stars in each galaxy. It is absolutely mind-boggling. That is, can be truly a spiritual experience.
I think science is starting to verify things that mystics have known for really a long time. And so then it brings it into a more mainstream consciousness and can maybe be more easily accepted by people.
It's fascinating to uncover some of the revelations of modern science and to feel that spirituality, religious, mystic experience may be verified. On the other hand, there's also this strong vein throughout religious life that the ultimate should not be named, cannot be named. Do we really need our mystic experience, the experience, to be verified by science?
In the mystic experience, we transcend the intellect. And so on the intellectual level of explanation or verification, we cannot expect any verdict on something that by its definition transcends the intellect and the mind. It's our consciousness, it's a higher level of consciousness to which we enter in the mystic experience.
But by my sterner teachers, I've been told, if you have some kind of dramatic mystical insight, verify it with a friend, verify it with a teacher, verify it with scripture, verify it with law, to make sure it isn't just your own invention. And because I think human beings are infinitely capable of infinite self-deception. And part of the work in the traditions is, in fact, to curb this, to set limits that if I have a dream in the middle of the night and said, Jonathan, you're allowed to eat pork and cheese sandwiches. And we'll go to a friend and said, God whispered in my ear, you can have pork and cheese sandwiches. And my friend will say, Jonathan, you're crazy. And sometimes my closest friends have said to me, when I've described my insights, Jonathan, you're crazy. And I'll come back and either agree with them or not talk to them again.
Brother David, in the Christian tradition, there seems to be practically a mystical belief that we can name each step as we move towards God. But on the other hand, if you name it too closely, you could also be persecuted for it. So there's a great tradition of persecuting mystics.
Yes. What is most important to me, or was most important in my experience, was the discovery that even the word God is only a pointer. Up to a certain age, I used to think that God, well, we know tables and chairs and cats and dogs, and then we also know God. But God isn't somebody else. That is the great insight of Thomas Merton. I think it's one of the most important statements of the 20th century. God isn't somebody else. You are it, you see, but not pure and simple. But there is more and more and more to it as you allow yourself to even fathom yourself. You come never to an end. And as you fathom the created world, you come never to an end. We are surrounded by mystery. Everything is totally filled with mystery.
Lynn, I'm intrigued with your description of the mystical experience as being the essence of love. And you've given this an intriguing name, the unknown she. Can you tell us where that phrase came from and why you chose it?
For many years, like I said, I studied metaphysics, and so there was the divinity, and then there was, or the primal element, and the male and female aspect of that. So I had worked for many years with the idea of the qualities that I thought were the male aspect of the divinity and the female. And then at some point, it seemed that what I was experiencing, I could only call she. This quality of compassion, mercy, kindness. And so, and it was beyond any of these merging of the two into one. It was the one. And so I could no longer really say he any longer. And so, and then I was given this poem, and the beginning of it is, I want to tell you a story, one you may already know. It is of a remembering of someone you knew long, long ago. In the silence of the night comes the unknown she, whispering sweetly, come dance with me. And so the poem goes on to speak about this dance of one, this primal dance. So as I moved deeper, it became she, and I just could no longer say he. There wasn't any he in this quality of love any longer at all. It was just pure consciousness.
Jonathan, do you feel an echo in your tradition?
Oh, very, very deep echoes. If I can start with an anecdote. About 2 years ago, I felt stuck, and I sought guidance. And I sought guidance, first of all, with a very stern Sufi teacher who said to me, Jonathan, the mountain is steep, time is short, work hard, and you can get there. Then I spoke to a woman from a Hindu tradition who just laughed and said, "Jonathan, you're already there."
That's she.
That's
She's
she,
telling
exactly.
you are already there.
Exactly.
How about
Thomas
you,
Merton said that so well. He said, we think that the spiritual path is a way on which you put one foot in front of the other. The spiritual path, what we call the spiritual path, consists in opening your eyes and noticing that you're already there. That's it.
And there's a distinction that I can make, is that when I was traveling, let's say more what I would have said it felt like this ascent. But then at some point, when I started moving in the depths, then it became she for me.
But it's interesting that the Semitic languages that formed us, there is no non-gender. Every verb, every noun is either male gender or feminine gender, and this in many ways has formed our thought, and there's a need somehow to smash these old patterns of thought, to have you can't say transgender these days, it means something else, but to get to a place where gender is irrelevant, because whatever is incorporates. I mean, I went home from that summer listening to both the voices, because I needed to be challenged, and I needed just to laugh.
Beautiful. So we've arrived at a crossroad here. I don't think we want to define it, but perhaps we could describe the mystic experience. Is that what qualifies a mystic to be a mystic? Do you have to have a mystical experience,
You have to have experience
to be a mystic?
Yes. It's not knowing about God, it's knowing God. You have a deep relationship with, an experience of.
I understand when we speak of knowing God. I have difficulty with the whole phrase mystical experience. I don't know what mystic is. I don't know what mystical experience is. I know there is such a thing as knowing God, as being beckoned to God, as feeling that one lives in duality and was of necessity, because that's the human condition, and was drawn towards unity. These are some of the characteristics that you can describe as mystic, but I don't call myself a mystic. Other people do, but that's irrelevant. But for the path that I know, this desire to transcend the duality of existence, to reach a place of unity, which exists beyond time, beyond causality, beyond relationship. It just is. It's moving, if you like, to quote Eric from doing to being. In God, one is. In the world, one does.
Brother David, where is God for you?
Well, what Jonathan just said rings so true to my experience. I remember as a student I had a summer job, and I was a prefect for the Vienna choir boys, and we had their home for the summer was in the Alps, and I was once taking a walk while they were practicing down below, and I was standing on a cliff, hundreds of feet above them, and listening, and through this absolutely clear mountain air comes this Palestrina motet, duo seraphim, exactly what you now refer to, the two seraphim calling to one another, holy, holy, holy. And that came up through this air, and even now when I tell it, I get goosebumps, and my spine is chilled, because that was one of those moments of experiencing the divine. But that was an ecstatic moment, and most of the time they are just everyday moments. More valid than the ecstatic, or at least equally valid. And in our context, that is called grateful living. We call it grateful living, and it's a practice, just like yoga or Zen. It's a real practice. If you make it such, And if you remind yourself moment by moment to live gratefully, that everything is gift, and it's a practice that every human being can understand, even children can easily pick it up. All the different traditions have gratefulness somewhere in their center. And will say, yes, that is very important. And people who have no other particular religious affiliation will say, yes, gratefulness is important. So that is our practice, to live gratefully, to see that every moment is a given moment, that this world is a given world, that you constantly receive from the great giver, from the great source, and give it back in thanksgiving. That would be the knower, the known, and the knowing, in a sense, that flowing forth from the source into all that exists and flowing back in thanksgiving.
What prevents us from being so giving, so compassionate? On one hand, it would seem to be the most natural of impulses to help each other and to pass on what we know and what we have. Is it the ego that moves between us and the divine, between us and other people? And if so, is that why the annihilation of the ego is a part of most mystical practice?
I wouldn't speak about the annihilation of the ego, because we need an ego. The ego is like the masks without which we couldn't be in the world. We have to have a presence in the world. Not annihilation, but the problem is that we identify with the ego. It's like an actor who identifies with Hamlet or with Ophelia. She goes crazy if she does that. If she forgets who she is and just thinks she's suddenly Ophelia, or he thinks he's suddenly Hamlet. And we are all crazy like that. We are thinking we are David, or we are Lynn, or Jonathan. That's our bent of mind. And the key is to no longer identify with the role, no longer identify, but have it, be able to play it.
An aspect of mystical experience that has intrigued me for a long time has recently been articulated by people like Michael Murphy, that the mystical experience itself may have been a trigger in human evolution. That the experience of a handful of people throughout human history has helped us with leaps of consciousness, leaps in evolution itself. Does that resonate with anyone here?
Well, you have already mentioned, Phil, that the great founders of the great spiritual traditions were mystics. Buddha was mystic, Moses, Jesus, Mohammed, they were all great mystics, and each expressed that experience of oneness in a very different way, according to the time, history, the culture, the whole setting, and then it also developed in a different way. But basically, it all goes back to that basic mystic experience, it would seem to me.
Can we talk for a moment about the value of the experience? It's a loaded word, a lapidary word, but is the mystical experience valuable simply for itself, to the person who has been visited, been graced, been blessed? Or is there another dimension where the mystical experience can also be of value to the tribe, the community?
Yeah, you share your
culture
grace.
Itself.
You share the grace that you have, the light that you're given. Yeah.
And all these great founders of the traditions have raised the consciousness of the tribe, of the human family to a new level. And the danger is that we block it there and that we put a ceiling on it. It's meant to continue to develop. Unless we raise the level of our consciousness to a new level, we won't make it through the crisis in which we find ourselves. And Ken Wilber points out that there is that no way has been found of raising consciousness that works statistically accept meditation, and meditation does work. So spiritual practice is the only way that has been shown to accelerate the progress in awareness.
Mm-hmm. To go back to your question about the value, and here perhaps I have a different attitude, that per se the experience has no value. It can be just like more water into the Dead Sea, or you go to a children's party and the children get a gift and they get so wonderfully excited, and at the end of the party you see it in the trash can. It becomes a commodity, and that I am so cautious about. That what does one do with the experience is either a step in self-transformation, of self-awareness, of self-purification, and the transmission to the world around attempt to bring the inner illumination into a kind of outer illumination. Sometimes it has to be done extremely subtly. You can't run around and say, I've just seen the truth. They throw stones at you and nobody listens.
No, I think, though, in most traditions now, there is the idea that you walk this understanding into your everyday life, that you're here to practice it, and this is how this transformation is this lift in consciousness will be, is people actually living their understanding. And, through these experiences, you get little glimpses as to what is, because you ask someone, what is your understanding? And they can't say anything. We don't have a language anymore to speak about these things.
Focus on gratefulness as practice will raise your level of social consciousness. The Buddhists have a beautiful prayer before a meal. Innumerable labors brought us this food. We should know how it comes to us. If we think of all the people that worked, I remember a bumper sticker, do you have food? Thank a farm worker. That immediately brings up all the political issues that are nowadays connected with undocumented farm workers, without whom we would have nothing on our table. These things are quite central to keeping the mystic experience alive. They are the overflow into everyday practice.
I appreciate all three of you hitting that grace note of gratefulness and the gift with our discussion. Thank you, Maata Lynn. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Brother David.
Thank you.